Well, with incumbent Governor Gretchen Whitmer term limited in 2026, it leaves a wide open race in the governor's race in a very, very competitive state. This is a state that is teetered closely between the Republican Party and the Democrat Party in recent years. Now, this once was a reliable Democrat state. It has now become a battleground state in America in the era of Donald Trump and the new populist Republican Party. Michigan voted for President Trump in 2016, President Biden in 2020, and then back to President Trump in 2024. Now, while at the same time, they elected one of the most progressive Democrats in America twice as governor. They also elected a Democrat to the open Senate seat in 2024 at the same time that they voted for President Trump. Alyssa Slotkin won the open Michigan Senate race by less than half a percentage point. We're talking about 19,000 votes that separated Alyssa Slotkin from Mike Rogers. Meanwhile, on the same ballot, the literal same piece of paper everyone has to fill out, Donald Trump won the state by 1.5 percentage points. It's like Donald Trump won the state by almost 90,000 votes, which just shows in the era of Donald Trump, there's a lot of low propensity voters. They are there to vote for Donald Trump. They are not there to vote for the Republican Party. They are there for Donald Trump. And so it is very safe to say that Michigan is a nuanced state that requires a very nuanced approach to understanding the politics of the state. But today, we are going to be talking about the governor's election in 2026 with the recent announcement that Representative John James of Michigan, he's a newly elected congressman from 2022, I believe he was initially elected. Here we can just look at a house map real quick in Michigan. He represents Michigan 10 right here. Initially elected, let's see, back in 2022 by, we're talking about 2,000 votes that separated him and his opponent. Went on to a pretty healthy margin of about 6 points that John James won in 2024. Now, like we said, currently he represents Michigan's 10th congressional district, and he is going to be running for governor in 26. James is a former Army captain who served multiple tours in Iraq and has run for Senate twice in the state. He lost in 2018, roughly by about 6 points, but because in that election he did better than expected, he ended up running in 2020 against, at the time, incumbent Senator Gary Peters in an election that turned out to be not great for the Republican Party. The Republican Party had lost the Senate. They had already lost the House of Representatives 2 years previously, and then they lost the presidency. But John James came within, we're talking about 1.5 points of defeating incumbent Senator Gary Peters. It's no wonder Gary Peters isn't running for re-election. If I were him, I probably won't want to run for re-election either. It's you came that close in a state that President Biden, John James ran ahead of Donald Trump in the state. Gary Peters won by about 1.5 points. President Biden won by almost 3 points, almost double the margin. But like we said, because of his 2018 loss, that was roughly 6 points, that was better than expected. Ran in 2020, better than expected. Now he is jumping in the governor's race. He has teetered between the governor's race and there's an open Senate race as well. Two very competitive races that you're going to see in the state of Michigan. But like I said, we're going to be looking. He announced that he is going to be running in the governor's race. He's ruling out a Senate race. He is running for a statewide executive office. So we're going to take a look at the field here, starting with the Democrat Party. Now, I would say as of right now, I would say leader in this race. Who is the front runner in the race right now? I would say is Jocelyn Benson, current Secretary of State, was elected at the same time that Gretchen Whitmer was elected. I would say right now that she is the front runner on the Democrat side in this race. You also have Garland Gilchrist, who is the current lieutenant governor of Michigan, and then you have a county sheriff who is also running as of right now. There was some potential in a former representative from Michigan's 9th Congressional District, Andy Levin, and then Joe Tate, who is the former Speaker of the House of Representatives in Michigan for the last 2 years, and he represented the 10th District. Now, obviously, there were some big names that were thrown around initially, like Pete Buttigieg. Buttigieg, he's a carpetbagger, came from Indiana, moved to Michigan. His name was thrown out there heavily when it came to the Senate and governor's race. And eventually, he was initially, toying with the idea. Eventually came out and said, hey, I'm not running for this. Didn't necessarily say he's got his eyes set on 2028, but we know that's what he's doing. We know he's got his eyes set on 2028. He knows that he did very well for a relatively unknown mayor in the 2020 presidential election, winning the Iowa caucus, barely losing the New Hampshire primary. It's like a very good showing. And because he did so well, he was rewarded. And because you could say he's gay and he likes choo-choo trains, he was awarded the Secretary of Transportation position during the Biden administration, where he enacted some of the most radical DEI policies. He moved the department away from merit-based hiring. You want to talk about air traffic control. Who's been the one who's been hiring the air traffic controllers? Why do we have over 1,000 job positions that are not filled when it comes to air traffic controllers? Why is that? Because Pete Buttigieg put all of these quotas in place. We have to hire so many black transgender women and minorities and Mexicans and transgender straight males. It's like this guy is a nut. And in the idea that the Democrats are even considering running him in 2028 just shows how asinine this party is. This party is so out of touch from reality. But I guess good for him for seeing the writing on the wall that he'd probably get his ass kicked in this election here, because ultimately he's from Indiana. He is not from Michigan. People in the Midwest don't like it. You see it time and time again. People who come from other states, they try and run in the Midwest. It just does not work. There's very few times when it's ever worked. Very few times. But then you also have Mallory McMerrow, who she declined to run for the governor's race. She is actually running for the open Senate seat. And then, of course, incumbent Senator Gary Peters, who is retiring, declined to run. Right now, the polling within side of the Democrat Party really shows a clear frontrunner, like we said, Jocelyn Benson, in the most recent Mitchell Research polling and then Target Insights. We can see that Jocelyn Benson is up roughly about 30 points in one and roughly about 40 points in the other election here, or in the other polling that we have here. It really is her race to lose at this point. She can stumble. There's things that could happen, but ultimately, if I were to bet on this, I would say Jocelyn Benson is going to be leading the Democrat Party in the governor's race in 2026. Now, jumping over to the Republican side, you have got a deep, deep bench of Republicans here. Some Republicans who should stay out of it, should have nothing to do with this, and some Republicans who actually would be halfway decent. Now, obviously, we were talking about John James earlier. He, I would say right now, is considered the front runner. There is the minority leader of the Michigan Senate, Ark Nesbitt, who is running in this race, but I believe John James, due to his previous electoral history, not necessarily that he won or that he won a congressional district, more that the margin that he lost in these races was so close, so much closer than expected, that Republicans in the state are going to be willing to throw their support behind him. And that is a big difference relative to Tudor Dixon, who we know Tudor Dixon ran in 2022, ended up losing to Gretchen Whitmer by roughly about 11 points. Not a great showing for the Republican Party. You're saying that in 2018, a bad year for Republicans, like an even worse year than 22, you're saying that John James had like half the margin of loss relative to Tudor Dixon in 22. I just don't know if she's the right person for the state. I think Gretchen Whitmer, I think there's a lot you can say about her that she is popular in the state. There's a lot of people from Michigan who like her. There's independents and moderate Republicans who do like her. But at the end of the day, Tudor Dixon, I just don't feel is going to be the best candidate. We have a great candidate in the Senate, Mike Rogers. You have a great candidate, John James, in the governor's race. But getting back to the Republican primary here, and let's jump back over to 2026. So you have John James, Ark Nesbitt. Some other names that have been thrown out there, like we said, Tudor Dixon, Mike Cox, who is the former Attorney General and a candidate for governor in 2010, who formed an exploratory committee. You have Perry Johnson, who's a businessman. He ran for president in 24. He ran for the Republican primary for governor in Michigan in 2022. kind of a weirder guy, not someone I'm looking to throw my support behind. You have Dick DeVos, who he is the husband of former Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. Some other names that have been thrown out there. Mike Rogers, obviously, he's probably going to be running in the Senate race, so not even really considering that. You have Lisa McClain, who has been a representative since 2020. And this list has changed a little bit because previously on here they had Ronna McDaniel, and I like to just kind of rip on Ronna McDaniel because I thought she did a terrible job as the head of the Republican National Committee. She did a terrible job. She oversaw the Republicans losing the House in 2018, the presidency in 2020, and then I think in 2022, the terrible midterms. And then, of course, she was replaced by Laura Trump, and there was basically co-CEOs or co-chairman of the party. It was Whately, Mike, and I can't remember his name, but Laura Trump was kind of running the bigger picture while Whately was running the day-to-day operations of the RNC. And right now, Poland really has it that it's John James' race. It's his race. There is no doubt about that. Now, Mitchell Research Poland has Tudor Dixon and John James really neck and neck. But out of the other 3 polls that have been taken over the last couple months, she does not even show up on here. You look at it, Target Insight, John James, 57%, National Research, 38%, On Message Incorporated, 46%. I think it is the right decision. I really do. Because then you need to talk about the Trump endorsement. In the Senate race and in the governor's race, we know the Trump endorsement is going to propel whoever gets it. It is hard. It's hard to beat a Trump endorsement. It's happened, don't get me wrong. There's been a handful of candidates who have won who were not endorsed by Trump, who Trump had endorsed someone else in the race. I think the Trump endorsement in the Michigan primary is going to be huge. I don't know who he's going to throw his hat behind right now. I think the smart decision would be to throw behind John James. I think, there was even a couple years ago, some talk that he was going to nominate John James for ambassador to the United Nations. So obviously he's got a good relationship with the Trump administration. I think John James, that would be perfect. Seal the deal. Let's get this over with. Just get it over with. Let's not have a big in-party fight. That sounds like a horrible idea. Let's focus on bashing the Democrats. Let's focus on how horribly the Democrats have managed the state. That's what we need to be talking about. But we have to talk about the X factor in this race. And this is going to be a very interesting one. And it is Mike Duggan. He has been the mayor of Detroit since 2014. And actually, for a Democrat, he's actually done a halfway decent job. I'm not going to lie about this. He was elected back in 2014, I believe, and has some of the highest approval ratings of any mayor in the country. It's like, most recently, we have a poll that shows that he had almost 70% approval rating. 70%. He represents a city that I think he's one of the first white people to represent a city that is predominantly black. That's just the reality of it. He's been very, very popular. Now, he mounted a write-in campaign in 2014, received 52% of the vote in the primary election. And then, of course, the 2 highest voters go on. It's kind of like a runoff election that you had there. And then in the general election, he ended up receiving 55% of the vote in that general election, becoming the first white mayor of the now majority black city since the 70s. Huge change. But he obviously sees that there is a national toxicity or even statewide toxicity when it comes to the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party is, it's toxic. Especially right now, you are seeing Democrats anywhere from a 21 to 29% approval rating. Some of the lowest approval ratings that we have seen in decades for the Democrats. And, Duggan said, quote, "It's clear to me that there's a lot of people in this country who are tired of both parties and tired of the system. And so I want to offer people a choice. Duggan is really most famous for leading Detroit out of bankruptcy and becoming a really thriving city. Not going to say it's great. There's still a lot of issues there. There's a lot of crime. There's a lot of problems there. It's an inner city at the end of the day. But it's like the city of Detroit was really on the verge of bankruptcy in the early 2010, 2011, 2012. And, they needed to renegotiate a lot of that debt, restructure a lot of that debt. And, he knows the party is toxic. And this is really, and I really believe this is why the Republicans could win this race. Because he is a Democrat. He has ran as a Democrat, and he's even said he feels he could govern more effectively as an independent. When you have a state legislature that is really evenly divided, it raises the stakes. It's not like you have full control of the government. You have to work across the aisle because it has gotten harder and harder to address issues that are partisan. It's like things that the environment is so toxic, people aren't willing to work across the aisle. And I'm guessing that's why a lot of people like Gretchen Whitmer. I think, she was horrible because of her response to COVID. She was one of the 5 governors that shut the state down. And then she required nursing homes to take in COVID patients, just like New York, just like Minnesota, just like California. And she probably killed thousands and thousands of seniors because she forced these nursing home facilities to take in people who are still spreading a virus to the most high-risk group of people that exist, all in one area. So, but ultimately, Mike Duggan, there are a lot of benefits that he could get out of an independent run, but there's also a lot of benefits for the Republicans out of this. Like he said, you can pull in a lot of disenfranchised voters who feel disenfranchised by the Republicans and the Democrats. Now, the downside to it is the money and the support from the base. He's not going to have the support from the state party. Maybe he's going to be able to fundraise a lot of money on his own, and that's really going to be the big question. How much can he raise on his own? How much support can he leech away from the Democrat and Republican Party? And how could this affect the general election if he stays until the end? Because that's a big question. He's running right now, but is he going to stay until the end? Or is he going to conveniently just drop out right before the ballots get finalized and get sent out to all the counties? Because he's a Democrat. He will pull more Democrats to his campaign than he'll pull Republicans. Now, he has to collect roughly 12 to 60,000 signatures with at least 100 from each congressional district in order to appear on the ballot, which I think will be okay. I think he'll be able to, I do think he'll be able to do that. You can see right now, there was a poll taken in February with Duggan running at 16%. 16%. It's like, this is a close race right here between Jocelyn Benson, Tudor Dixon, Jocelyn Benson, Mike Cox. Throw John James in there. You have John James in there. You have 2 of them here where you either have a 4-point separation or a 12-point separation. Ultimately, I don't think the governor is going to win by that margin. Whoever wins, I think it's going to be a under 5 state. It's like this is going to be one within 5 points. But we're going to see. The general election poll, and now it all looks good for Jocelyn Benson. No doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. But ultimately, we're 18 months away from this election. We've got a long ways to go. We got a lot of campaigning to do. We have a lot of money to be spent. A lot of, flops from these candidates and their campaigns that can occur. And, and there's a lot to talk about. What are going to be the biggest issues in this race going forward? When asked to voters in that same poll, what is the single most important issue facing the state of Michigan that'll have the most impact on their vote for governor, the economy was number 1. The economy and jobs, inflation and rising prices were cited by 20% of voters in the general election. The only other issues that reached double digits were honesty in government, taxes/government lending and debt, and other issues were election and voter security, abortion, education, healthcare, immigration. So a couple of things that we should take away from this. Number 1, immigration. There is causation correlation between what Donald Trump is doing on the federal level and polling that shows that voters' top concerns are not immigration anymore. Immigration is really sinking like a rock, and that's a good thing, because that means Donald Trump is performing. He is doing what he needs to do, what he is supposed to do, what he was elected to do. We know his mass deportations are very favorable, with 6 in 10 Americans approving of it. We know that deploying troops to the border has even more support than that. And he's doing everything he can using tariffs to leverage Mexico, to stop the illegal immigration, to stop the fentanyl trafficking, to stop the human smuggling. That is what Trump has done. And you can see it in Poland that it is no longer a top issue, because they see the Trump administration taking huge and massive action when it comes to this. It is going to come down to the economy, jobs, and inflation and rise in prices. So a few things. We know that a lot of these elections are going to have implications from the top down. There are going to be implications from DC that you see that play out in these more local elections. And obviously, the two biggest ones you can look at are the reconciliation package, that is how Donald Trump is going to enact his domestic spending agenda, number one. And I guess you kind of, one subcategory A, the appropriations bill. They're going to have an appropriations bill by September 30th is when the continuing resolution right now currently runs out. They're going to have an appropriations bill put together. They take all the data that they're getting from the Department of Government Efficiency. They can see where is money being wasted. Go in. They need to make sure that it gets appropriated, that we take money away. Take money away where it's being wasted. Heed the advice of the people within the Department of Government Efficiency. And there really needs to be a strong pushback against this whole that Trump's trying to destroy Social Security. How is taking non-citizens who are receiving Social Security funds out of Social Security destroying Social Security? Like how? If anything, you're extending the life of Social Security because you have less people who aren't paying into Social Security or who didn't pay into Social Security who are leeching off. There are less people doing that now. But we know a lot of it is going to be the reconciliation bill, which is where Trump is going to be able to implement his domestic spending agenda. He's going to be able to renew his tax cuts from 2017, and he's going to be able to deepen his tax cuts from 2017, trying to reduce corporate taxes to the lowest in the world so we can attract businesses to come to the United States, make their products here, make your products in America. But then it's going to come down to trade. We all know we are in the middle of a tariff battle right now. And you've heard me say it before, but there is issues that I had with the way the Trump administration rolled out these tariffs. I had an issue with the messaging. Why is there such mixed messaging coming from the White House? I think it can serve a purpose, but it was so drastically different. You have people like Peter Navarro saying that tariffs were gonna raise hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue. Meanwhile, you have other people like Scott Bessent from the Treasury Department saying, nope, this is leverage. So it's like, which is it? Because if it's leverage, you're not going to get revenue. Because leverage means you're only going to use it for leverage and you're trying to get down to 0% tariffs. You're trying to get them to remove their non-tariff barriers, their VAT taxes, all of that, or any other regulations that other countries have in place that do not, that stop American products from going into their markets. And hey, maybe if they remove all the barriers, maybe American products are still uncompetitive in that market. But I guarantee you there are a lot of markets for a lot of different products where Americans could be competitive in. Because remember, we're capitalists. We want competition. We want to compete with other people. That is what helps drive down the cost of goods and services, is competition. Competition is what took electricity from being something that only the rich and wealthy had that cost $20,000 to have electricity in your house to now something that is the status quo, that is the de facto in every home. Every home has electricity. And you're able to do it at a fraction of the cost of what it cost 250 years ago to have electricity in your house. But, like we said, the tariffs are going to be a big thing. Is Trump able to negotiate new trade deals? Are we able to, we are going to have tariffs on China. And I support the tariffs on China, but that could hurt Trump in the midterms. Even though I think a lot of people want tariffs on China, we're going to see it in our prices. But at the same time, that's why we must must make good relationships with our other trading partners, like Canada, like Mexico. Just because we have free trade doesn't mean it's fair trade. We need to make sure we have fair trade with them. Fair trade with Vietnam, fair trade with Japan, fair trade with the EU. There are many other countries that we need to start building alliances with and move away from China. The World Trade Organization has tilted the playing field towards China for 4 decades. It is over with. We are not going to be reliant on China, because here's the thing. If we go to war with China, if China decides that they want to cut us off from a critical supply chain, we're screwed. We are honestly screwed if China decides to start screwing with us. Especially when it comes to things like electronics. China assembles over 70% of all smartphones that are in the United States right now. They process roughly 20% of all global semiconductors and chips. That's outside of Taiwan. Not even including Taiwan. They do 15 to 20% of the global supply of chips. You look at pharmaceuticals. China supplies somewhere in the ballpark of 70 to 80% of all U.S. active pharmaceutical ingredients for generic products, like antibiotics, painkillers. You know, we saw during COVID what a cutoff could mean, what shortages looked like. You know, you want to look at industrial equipment, machinery and car parts. Well, we're probably relying a quarter of everything we get, it comes from China. Whether it's wiring or brakes, it traces back to China at the end of the day. And then the big one, rare earth elements and minerals. China controls 80% of the global rare earth processing sites. You need those for batteries, for TVs, for microphones, for computers, for monitors, everything, anything that's electronic. They require those 17 rare earth minerals. Not for every single one. There are some, like the heavy rare earth minerals, and then there are light ones. But ultimately, the U.S. has one mine in the United States, and we ship most of it over to China. I think we have a processing plant in the United States, but ultimately, to get it, we are not anywhere near where we need to be to replace China. And due to regulations, over-regulation by the federal government, it can take 10 to 15 years for a plant to become operational, for a processing facility to become operational. We cannot be reliant on China for this. That is just, we cannot rely on China for this. And so we want to get back to talking about the economy. We want to talk about rising prices. We have a lot that we're trying to combat here because we still want to win elections. We still need to win elections at the end of the day. But you even saw it over the weekend, or this week, I guess, where you had current governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, was at the White House. She was at the White House talking about tariffs. Let's take a listen to her.
And I can tell you, I understand the motivation behind the tariffs. And I can tell you, here's where President Trump and I do agree. We do need to make more stuff in America. More cars and chips. More steel and ships. We do need fair trade.
And she's 100% right. And she knows because there's a large manufacturing base in Michigan. She understands the constituents that she represents, clearly. Because we do need to build more ships here. Why is it that last year we built like 5 ships in the United States while China built 1,800? We can't be reliant on China for steel. We cannot be reliant on them for products that are vital to national security. We just can't be. So there's going to be a lot here. Because the reality of the next governor, they are going to need to focus on auto manufacturing. How could Trump's tariffs, when it comes to he was trying to bring back auto manufacturing, could we see job growth in Michigan in the manufacturing industry? We might see output growth, but do you see job growth? You know, is Trump going to be able to bring jobs back to Michigan? That is going to be a big part of it. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Who do you think wins this race? Who do you think is the nominee for the Democrats and the Republicans? And if it is Jocelyn Benson and John James, who wins this race? What do you think the margin is? That's going to wrap things up for today, folks. We will catch you next time.